Oh yeah.
God sake, you got to give more power to the people. For God's sake, why don't you give more power to the people?
Local Matters family. Today we are joined by Brittany Williams Burnett. She is the CEO of our local United Way of the CSRA. How are you doing today, Brittany?
Hey, Janice. Great to be here.
Great to have you. I'm so glad that you were able to come on with us. I have featured a number of nonprofit agencies in our community because I know people don't always understand the key role that those nonprofits play. Our podcast is focused on quality of life issues, and sometimes, obviously, our local commissions, authorities, et cetera, have an impact on that, but so do the organizations that provide services. So I'm so glad that you're here to tell us a little bit more about the United Way of the CSRA. So, but before we get into that, I want you to tell us a little bit about yourself. Tell us a little bit about Brittany.
Well, first, what's really interesting about this journey is, as ultimately we'll get to talking about United Way and my role here and United Way's role in the community is, I will tell you, more often than not, many people do not set out to be in the nonprofit space, and I am one of those. And so, I grew up in Atlanta, and I went to college in South Carolina. I went to Furman University in Greenville, South Carolina. Came back to Atlanta when I graduated and did a job in medical sales for a couple of years, and it was great. Great paying job, especially right out of school. And then one of my parents became very ill, and basically everything just was put on pause for me. I left the job that I was in that was very lucrative and decided to really manage my family for a year before my stepdad, who basically was like my dad, before he passed away at the very young age of 38. And so it was during that time where I just had a reset of what was it that I really wanted to do when I grew up. But our family, we grew up most weekends volunteering. My granddad was very involved with Habitat for Humanity. So I had a hammer in my hands most Saturday mornings. He wrote 5 books that all benefited Habitat. And so it was a part of our DNA growing up that we gave back. And so it was from that I really started to look at, are there opportunities to have a career where you can give back? And I really didn't know that there was. But I looked at the time in the newspaper, found a job posting for a role at my local United Way in Atlanta. I knew I wasn't qualified for it, but I applied anyways. I ended up working what was started out as a temporary job and stayed there for 11 years at United Way. That's
Okay.
how this journey started.
All right, great. And that you do bring up an interesting point. There's some jobs that people just don't grow up thinking about doing, but then they get into it, they get exposed to it, they get into it, and they figure out it's the perfect fit for them. So you have worked for how many United Way organizations now?
I worked for 2. So I was at United Way of Greater Atlanta for 11 years. And then I left and went to an organization actually that United Way supported. We focused on mental health, foster care, and really taking care of young adults as they aged out of the foster care system. And I was there for 3 years. And then my husband's job brought us to Augusta nearly 7 years ago.
Okay. All righty. And you have been in the role as CEO now for, is it all of that 7 years or is it a little?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Okay. All right. Very good. So, did you know anything about Augusta before you all moved here? Just curious.
So what I had known about Augusta before we moved here was I had been here one time in my almost 30 years of living, even though it was only 2 hours east of Atlanta. Had never been to the Masters tournament, but had literally like driven through probably on my way to Columbia, but really didn't know much about Augusta except for the tournament and except for the fact that it was one of the, outside of Atlanta, one of the largest communities in the state.
Okay. All right. Very good. So, what were your initial impressions or surprises? Was it what you thought it was, or was it a little bit different?
Well, what was really exciting to us was that it was a smaller community than where we had come from.
Mhm.
And we were really looking for a place we could put some roots down and really build community, I think in maybe a different or possibly easier way than what we could in Atlanta. I mean, we had family, of course, in Atlanta, but we were really looking for also to create our own circles and figure out what community looked like here. So when we first moved here, it was definitely everyone has been, was, and is still really welcoming. And so we found it really easy to just go ahead and start finding circles. If it was within our neighborhood, if it was within school or church, or even within our careers, very quickly we found out that we could form various different relationship groups and really set some roots in here.
Okay, well, great. I'm glad you've been able to make some connections.
Mhm.
And as you came into the United Way, it has been a period of change and evolution, I think, for United Ways throughout the country. Because way back when, going back to when I was in Albany, Georgia, I was on the United Way Allocations Committee. And what we did at that time was just visit agencies and then determine who we thought was most worthy of the funding that we had available for that particular year. And now you see United Ways getting involved with more direct service types of activities. Like I think your organization played a key role with the hurricane relief efforts and also post-pandemic housing efforts and things like that. Can you talk a little bit more about some of the activities you all undertook in response to a natural disaster? And well, pandemic was a different type of natural disaster, I guess, but how you all responded to those crises in our country?
So Janice, you're exactly correct when you talk about, the role that you played when you were in Albany. United Way raised money. We used volunteers to help make sure it was distributed to really worthwhile organizations in our local communities. And I think that's a really important piece to pause on for a minute, is that there are about 1,100 United Ways around the country, and they're all independent and autonomous from each other. And they all have local governing boards. And those United Ways are concerned about what is most critical in their local community. And so they've got the ability to pivot and be feasible and flexible rather on what is most imperative on what that community needs. And what some of the needs are in Augusta are different than needs in Atlanta or Albany or other parts of the country. And so the fact that each United Way is local and able to really invest and dig in deep and keep their ear on the ground and their eyes open to the local needs makes us really unique. And we have a local governing board that allows these decisions to be made right here in our local communities. So as we think about, again, when I think about coming in 7 years ago, little did we know that a year and a half after that, we would face a global pandemic. And it was during that time where, United Way here at the CSRA had done some direct service work, little bits of rent and utilities assistance, but at a very, very small scale. And it didn't take long for us to make the decision, because of the support from our board and with some staffing and infrastructure changes we made, that we jumped really headfirst into the work of direct assistance around the pandemic. And so our United Way here, we had a partnership with our local government, and we served as the sole provider of the emergency rent and utilities assistance program throughout the pandemic. And so through that time, we invested about $12 million back into the community and helped keep over 2,500 households in Richmond County from eviction because of that program. And so that was really our first foray in a major way of jumping into direct service. But it didn't take long for us to then say, well, where are there other gaps in the community? Because we have got fantastic nonprofits doing really critical work throughout our area. But we also realized, despite all that, there are still some existing or even some newly created gaps in service that are needed. So what we've done is, over the past few years, is look at where are some of those gaps, and is there the opportunity where United Way is uniquely positioned to help fill some of those gaps ourselves? And that's how we've really jumped into a much more direct service space than we have in the past.
Yeah. Okay. And as you speak of those gaps that you identified, can you just enlighten us about maybe what one major gap is that you all have found?
Yeah, so one continues to be transportation. And so, and I don't think that we're unique to other, mid-sized
Mhm.
communities where we have public transit, but it's not enough. It's not robust enough. And we also know that many residents in our community experience transportation hurdles.
Mhm.
Transportation is expensive. It's not equally accessible for all. And so through a partnership that we have with Lyft, we have a program called Ride United. And so if someone needs an appointment to, a job interview, to a doctor's appointment, maybe to school or to work or to a food pantry, some of those locally critical decision appointments, basics needs appointments, they can simply call us at United Way by calling 211, which is our first call for community help. Call 211 and we will book that resident the ride, the Lyft ride, where they need to go, and we'll also book their return ride back home. So, last year, we had over 1,200 Lyft rides that were booked for residents in Richmond and Columbia County. Other years, it's been many, many more. And we know that that still isn't enough, but it's helping fill a small gap for someone that just needs a ride, there and back, or maybe for 2 days while they get that tire replaced on their car, they get the new battery, or maybe their ride they normally use is unavailable for a day or two. That's where this service comes in so that we're not disrupting some of these critical needs that our residents have.
Okay. And thank you for highlighting the transportation challenges. You're right. Augusta is by far not the only city with transportation issues, but transportation is such a challenge to public transit. Running a good public transit service is much easier when you've got a lot of people going to the same place every day. And so those cities, like when I lived in Richmond, Virginia, everybody needed to be downtown pretty much at the same time so they could run express buses and everything else because everybody was going to the same place pretty much. It just made it a lot easier to schedule and provide. Whereas Augusta, we're so spread out. I mean, some people are headed downtown, not that many, obviously. Some people are headed to the medical district. Some people are headed to Fort Eisenhower, and employment centers are just spread out everywhere, and it just makes it extremely difficult to provide an efficient and timely transportation
Yes.
service. So, how does all this get paid for? You mentioned the Lyft rides. Who's paying for those?
So we apply actually for grants to help offset this cost. So, again, we're really grateful for this partnership we have with Lyft. But I'll also say, in addition, when we think about transportation, I mentioned our 211 call center, which is
Mhm.
our first call for community help. And we've got, thousands of people that call or go online every year looking for help in some way. Maybe they're new to the community and they're still trying to navigate some things. Maybe they're calling us for the very first time. They've never needed assistance before until now they do. And it can be complicated to navigate social services, as many of us know. And so we are there to help them navigate some of that. But the reason I say that is because it doesn't take long for us to realize when someone has a transportation need. But our
Mhm.
team also asks the next question. And sometimes what we're finding is that people have said, well, right, I need a ride because I need food. So they have two needs. So, but
Mhm.
there's a food hurdle and there's a transportation hurdle. And so because of a partnership that we've got with DoorDash and we've got with Golden Harvest, we actually just a few months ago launched a new program called Last Mile
Mhm.
ride delivery. So someone can call us, and then we've got some emergency food right here. We have a storefront, we call it. And then
Mhm.
we also book a Door Dasher to come and pick up the food and take the food to them. And
Oh,
so
wow.
it's again, we're looking at how we can help with two hurdles at one time. But the other thing we know, Janice, is that if they get this emergency food from us, that's good for a day or two. But it's
Mhm.
likely they need a more long-term solution. So because of some partnerships we've got with some of Golden Harvest partners, we can now book that DoorDasher to go pick up a more sustainable food box for them that's a little more ongoing and consistent outside of this emergency food. And so I say all of that to you to say, when you ask how these things are funded, a lot of it is through partnership. We've got partners with DoorDash, partners with Lyft, partners with Golden Harvest, and then we look to find local community supporters who understand the importance of making sure these connections are made. And so we got support from them to help offset these costs.
Yeah, that is wonderful to see organizations working together like that in order to meet the needs. Because, like you said, these needs are very complex at times. And sometimes I'm sure the person who realizes that he or she has one need may need a whole bunch of other things that they can't quite articulate.
Right.
So they need the help of your staff in order to pull all that together to see what resources might be out there to meet a variety of needs.
That's right.
As we talk about needs, the genesis for this conversation, when I first reached out to you, it was that I see the direction we're headed in. Got a very volatile stock market. We've got certainly federal employees who are losing jobs, and then we also see some private sector employees who have lost jobs throughout the country. And we see the possibility of fewer grant funds coming into local government organizations and state government organizations. And it just looks like it could be a recipe for disaster to me. So I really want your perspective on that and how United Way responds when there is a period of peak need, like what we could perhaps see coming up soon.
That's a great question, Janice. And first, maybe I'll define a term that from people around the country are now becoming more familiar with, or our CSRA in Greater Augusta area is becoming more familiar with. And I'll put this in context in a minute. And, for a long time in our area, we continue to look at families who are living in poverty and putting immense resource behind helping those families. But what we haven't talked about are what we call ALICE families. And ALICE is an acronym that stands for Asset Limited, Income Constrained, Employed. And these are families that are hardworking. They're just not making enough to make ends meet. And so they make more than the federal poverty level, but not enough to basically pay the bills at the end of the week or at the end of the month. So these Alice families are basically like a hidden pocket of hardworking families and households in our area, making some money, but not making enough. And when we think about the CSRA, 51% of the families throughout the CSRA are struggling in some way, meaning they're living in poverty or they're these Alice households. And that 51% is a number that was kind of in place before September 27th when this hurricane hit our community. What we know right now is that more families than ever are struggling for a handful of reasons. One, we're just now, I guess tomorrow, 7 months past a major disaster that our community was not expecting at all. And so we know people are calling us for the first time asking for help. They're calling back numerous times, needing help on numerous different issues. And then you add on the layer of uncertainty with what's happening with people's jobs. If you're a federal employee, if you're in the for-profit, the corporate sector, there's a high levels of anxiety, fear, uncertainty. That's exhausting by itself. And so again, we've got families who have been living in the margins for a long time, and now maybe they have fallen below the ALICE threshold. They're now maybe living in poverty, or maybe they were above the ALICE threshold, and now they're an ALICE family because of certain things that have been cut. Maybe someone did lose a job that was in the federal government. But I'll also say there's a level of uncertainty because of programs that had been federally funded, if they have either been halted or I guess stopped or even paused. That puts a great strain on the nonprofit community too, because if we don't have the funds to continue these programs, this could mean for us, we have to cut staff. But most importantly, this means that we have to cut the level of service delivery. And if we're cutting the level of service delivery when we have a high need of service delivery, higher than ever before, then the gap we've got is even larger to fill. We've got less funds, more need, high levels of uncertainty, then it does create a bit of a recipe. I don't want to say for disaster, but there is a heightened sense, such a heightened sense of uncertainty. It's hard to know what people need to do next. And when I say people, I'm meaning if you work in the nonprofit space, if you're a family or an individual that needs services, it's really hard to navigate right now when there's so many question marks everywhere.
Okay. Yeah, there are a lot of question marks, and I know that just raises the level of anxiety for so many. I'm so glad that you brought up the term Alice, because as part of my consulting practice, I do executive search, and I was doing a search for a United Way position in another state, maybe a couple years ago. And somebody, one of the applicants used the term Alice in the interview, and I was like, what in the world is she talking about? And I'm so glad that you explained that because I was not familiar with that term until I conducted that interview, and I'm glad you brought that out. And say again what that acronym stands for.
So ALICE stands for, it's kind of like three phrases: asset limited, income constrained, employed.
Okay.
That employed part is so critical because I do think in our community, when we talk and people, we look at as supporters and donors, people are anxious to support those that are working. And when we can say that there are families that are hardworking and not working enough, I think there's an increased level to support those families and figure out what we can do to support them in the best way. But again, if 51% of the CSRA is struggling in some way, meaning living in poverty or an Alice family. But when we look, for example, here in Richmond County, that number is 59%. Right? We look in Columbia County, it's 37%. And so we've got data from throughout the entire state, all around Alice families. And then what I love is that we can actually get a little more granular and we can look at what does Alice look like per zip code in our community, which helps not only us at United Way, but it helps other service providers look and see where it might make the most sense for them to put their efforts and their direct service delivery in areas where they've got a high number of Alice households. So we think, for example, about a program like VITA, which is the Volunteer Income Tax Assistance Program.
Mhm.
We've now done it here at United Way for 2 years. It's free income tax prep for families who qualify, because we know that paying $200, $300, $400 to get your taxes prepared can be a burden.
Yeah.
But by having this done for free by volunteers who are trained and certified by the IRS, not only is that family saving a few $100s, but we also have someone that's helping to determine if they're eligible for additional refunds. So it's a win for our whole community by having something like VITA. But if we're looking at having, expanding this program, it only makes sense for us to look at where our Alice families live and put the program in those communities where the Alice families are, as they're the ones that can take advantage of this sort of service the most. So we can use Alice data to determine a lot of different activities, not just for United Way, but many others throughout the community are using that Alice data too.
Okay. That's awesome. Thank you so much. As you talk about the work you're doing, how many people do you have on staff here at the CSRA?
For a long time, Janice, we had about 15 staff. We were pretty consistent for years and years. We're in a major transformation and growth mode here, and we now have over 20 staff.
Okay. All right. Very good.
And that's, we're expanding the VITA program. We've added Mission United to our work. This last mile, service, the Ride United, is all of these other things that we're adding are increasing our capacity so we can have more influence and more impact in our community, has now allowed us the opportunity to hire more people.
Okay. All right. Very good. And I know that even with that addition to your staff, you use a lot of volunteers. Can you talk a little bit about what somebody could help you do if they had the time and interest in volunteering with United Way?
Great question, Janice. We love volunteers. As you had mentioned, when you were in Albany, you served on a panel that helped make the decisions on how funds were distributed. And we call them Citizens Review Panel volunteers. We still need people to do that during a season. Normally it's the spring. They read applications from our programs that have applied for funding, and they have the very hard and fulfilling job to decide where those funds should go. So that's, for some people that love that sort of work and you love reading applications and looking at financials, being a Citizens Review Panel volunteer is the job for you. But in July, we have a big Stuff the Bus event. We collect and sort school supplies and distribute them through our local school systems. If you love that, Stuff the Bus is for you. In August, we do our huge Project Serve Day when we have nearly 400 volunteers that go out through the community all on the same day, volunteer at dozens of our nonprofits, and really make a huge impact all on one day. That's Project Serve. And then we have our big book bash. We collect books and have a big event in June in partnership with Rise Augusta and others. And then another new program we added a few years ago is we actually manage the Empty Stocking Fund here at United Way. And so last year, almost 2,000 kids received gifts through the Empty Stocking Fund. And we have 2 massive distribution days. We need volunteers to help play Santa and make sure that those gifts are given to these families in need. Those are just a few of the ways where people can continue to give back here.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much for that. And if people want to learn more about the United Way of the CSRA, and if they need information on services, please tell us the best place for them to get that information.
So I'll give you two resources. If you want to volunteer and give back and learn more, the best place is our website, which is uwcsra.org. Or you can always call us. And then also for residents or families who are in need, 211 is the best place to start. The first call for community help, you'll get someone who lives here locally, who knows the resources best and can help connect them to the various things that they may qualify for.
Okay. And if somebody isn't sure, they're just like, generally, I kind of need, I got so many needs, I can't sort them out. Is 211 is that the best route for them to go?
211 is the best place to start. They'll ask the next question. And again, if they need food, we can do one thing. If they're a veteran, we can help do something else. Maybe they say, I need to save on my prescriptions. We have single care, which is a prescription savings card. We'll tell them about that. We're basically like the traffic cop, helping them
Uh-huh.
navigate all the things that they may be eligible for that they don't necessarily know about.
Okay. All right. Great. Brittany, thanks so much for all of your work in our community. Thanks so much for your guest appearance on Local Matters. You know, when you come into the show, we call you a part of the family. So now you're officially a part of our Local Matters
Yay.
family.
Well, thank you for having me, Janice. I hope this helped provide just some information about the varying things that we're doing. I love that you highlight nonprofit work because we don't always get a good megaphone to be able to speak to things like this. So I appreciate everyone who's listening, and hopefully everyone learn more about some of the work happening here at United Way.
It's awesome. Great. Thank you.